Hey, Ethan, thanks very much for joining. If you could just start by introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about yourself.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on. A little bit about me. I grew up in Maine and I really struggled learning to read and write. I had to learn to read by the end of third grade, struggled with writing even beyond that. Was hooked up with early speech to text back in the day. And I was really fortunate to have a couple of educators lean in. And I went from struggling student to getting a full scholarship to Harvard. But I had family members who didn't weren't so lucky and didn't graduate from high school, and so it's always sort of been in the back of my mind. Um, how fortunate, how lucky, actually lucky I was to have those supports, and that's been the grounding of Adaptive Reader. The core question is how can we help every student, regardless of neurological differences, or maybe they had interrupted education. Maybe they speak a different language at home than what's used in the classroom. What's the potential for using AI to make sure that every student is able to fully comprehend and engage with the curriculum, irrespective of what their current reading level is?
And we're going to speak about adaptive reading quite a lot after, but I'm just curious, how is it that you managed to get support and there's a lot of others that did not?
It's a great question. And I think one that I hope a lot more educators and folks start thinking about, especially as we have this wave of AI coming into schools. One of the most important factors for students' success is just having one adult that really believes in them. And when I look back at my K-12 education and the things that were really helpful and sort of moving me forward, very little of it was curricular. So much of it was about having those few teachers that kind of raised their hands and leaned in and said they really believed in me, and helped and supported where they could along the way. And I think what's happening now, we speak to teachers that will have 30, 38 students in one class. Teachers are just so overwhelmed and overloaded that they don't have the capacity to do that extra work to really support the individual students. And we should be moving in the opposite direction. We should be making sure that every student has an adult in the school who they know really believes in them.
I totally resonate with a lot of that for sure. And obviously facing difficulties at school, how do you think that shaped you in terms of, I've seen you're an entrepreneur, you've started multiple things. Do you think that's had any impact on this?
I think it certainly teaches resilience in a way. I failed every spelling test that I ever took. I remember taking the SATs and I got the lowest score you could get on the writing section because it's still handwritten and I have a really hard time writing by hand. I was fortunate enough, I did well enough in the math and reading to get me into a fantastic college, but I still have these things that I struggle with, and will probably always struggle with to a certain extent. And that teaches you a level of humility and a level of sort of resilience that I think can be really impactful, because in startup land, you're going to be wrong most of the time. And a big part about startups is understanding your hypothesis, your thesis, and just going after this idea or concept or market, knowing that you're going to be wrong and embracing yourself to be able to make those mistakes along the way, understand them, and the humility to both take advice and learn from each of those mistakes, get back up and keep going.
Interesting. And yeah, I agree with what you said. I think that's why I asked, because it always interests me, like the amount of founders there are, how prominent things like dyslexia, ADHD are amongst founders. So I'm always curious what the root of that is, and whether it's that fact it makes resilience, or maybe, the secret superpowers, who knows. Yeah, so from college you started an art business, I believe. Could you tell me more about that?
Yeah. So out of my dorm room senior year, this is over a decade ago now, back before Bitcoin was mainstream and alternative
Nice.
back when people thought their investments were just their house in the stock market. And so there was a new securities law, a new micro-securities law that had been passed by Congress that allowed for kind of micro-securities. And we set about with this idea, this thesis that blue chip artworks, right? Your Picassos and Van Goghs and all of these other things, they're really expensive. And actually getting liquidity out of them is very expensive. If you sell it through an auction house, they might take 30 or 40% of the overall fee. And it's a very time-intensive, time-consuming process. And so our thesis there was, hey, what if we can actually allow people to buy shares, fractions of these artworks, and be able to buy and sell those shares. And it's an opportunity for everyone to feel a different connection and sense of ownership with art. But it's also, from a market perspective, an opportunity to bring liquidity to a traditionally illiquid market. And there have been some past precedents. The British Rail Trust Pension Fund bought about $300 million, I believe, in art in 1971. They, over selling that collection off over 20 years, had really incredible returns for the pension. So this idea of art as an asset class and portfolio that can be shared across with shared risk and burden across a lot of individuals wasn't new. But I think from that experience, spent some time working on that, raised a bit of capital, and realized that we were too early in the market. And that was such a powerful learning lesson. And I think that's one of the hardest ones for entrepreneurs to learn, is that so much of this is about timing. There's a company now called Masterworks that's built an incredible business off of that model, but people needed to get used to Bitcoin and all of these other alternative asset classes, become aware of that needed to be a staple before, your average person would be ready to invest as well.
It's crazy because, if you would have started that business, say, 2 or 3 years ago, the results would have been so different. It's similar as wine as well. I see so many, quite a few companies doing really well using wine as an investment. So it's crazy. You can have the best idea ever, but that's such just a small part of it. You've got to be able to execute it well. And then you've got to have the right time and the right funding, the right team. It's so hard. I remember starting a t-shirt business and I had this great idea and I made a good side hustle out of it, but I never did that well. 2 years ago, I saw a company who were doing amazing from it. And I was just like, they just executed it so well and got the right time. And that's made me realize, like you say, that idea is just part of it. Yeah. Then from there, did you take the learnings of that and that allowed you to start other ventures and eventually go into Adaptive Reader?
Yeah. So I shifted from that into getting into product design and product management. Worked in some corporate innovation labs and sort of corporate startup arms, and a couple of, as an early stage or founding team member for a couple of ventures, and fantastic learning experiences across those. This is my 6th time bringing a new product to market, and you learn so much every time. And I just love the sort of speed and intellectual challenge and the curiosity that you have to bring to early stage. But when ChatGPT came out, I was just like, wow, this is an incredibly powerful tool that's not ready to, there are a lot of things it's not ready to do. But one thing that it can do really well, maybe it's superpower in a way, is transforming content, changing the content itself in different ways, whether changing the sort of structure or the language to make it accessible for more people. And that really became the foundation.
Tell me a little more about that. So talk me really through the first days of founding it. How did you get the idea, then go straight into building the product?
Yeah, my initial idea, I think I talked about it as Newsella for novels. For folks who aren't familiar with Newsella, it's been around since 2012. It was a very early mover in the sort of leveled text space. So they would take news articles and rewrite them manually at 5 different reading levels. And that sort of grew very quickly to the point where they had about 90% of US K-12 students using Newsella. Really popular product, but still very manual. And so my first concept was, or the first jumping off point was, can we actually apply that to much longer content, novels and textbooks? And so that was sort of the jumping off point. I really thought it was going to be a digital product at the time. And the first thing I did, jumped on Upwork and put a job up for educators to do user research interviews, like totally random. Talked to 7 educators, talked to them about their classroom and their students' reading needs, and told them about my idea. And I was so surprised. Every one of them asked if they could get paperback books. We've seen that trend play out. I've done about 120 user research interviews with educators, reading interventionists, etc. Found that, over 85% of them prefer print for long form reading. And it was just a really interesting learning curve. But from that jumping off point, we evolved from Newsella for novels to really becoming a core accessibility tool for anyone and everyone on any piece of content. And thinking about not only our capacity to transform content using AI, but actually also our capacity to take that content and bring it into the world, into print-on-demand paperbacks, and do the end-to-end sort of distribution and fulfillment of that around the globe using third-party print-on-demand vendors. So it's not just like, how do we use AI in the cloud? It's like, can we take AI and bring it out of the cloud into something that's really pragmatic and practical and physical? And so that was kind of a jumping off point for me.
Demand for print is somewhat interesting. What do you think is causing that?
Yeah, so we started asking educators in these interviews, why print? And I think a lot of edtech founders, when educators push back about adding another digital product in their classroom, our natural response is, well, they just need to try it. Once they've tried it, they'll see that this is so much better. Or they're like, these teachers, they're sexual Luddites. They just don't like technology. They don't get how technology can improve their classroom so much. But when I actually asked these teachers, they had really thoughtful, pragmatic reasons within their classroom why print was better for their students. I kind of bucketed their responses into 5 categories. So about 35% of them cited research that reading comprehension and retention is much higher with print than digital. We also had educators who talked about it from an equity perspective, where a lot of their most vulnerable students still don't have internet access reliably at home. Another big one, if you think about a 45-minute class session, teachers would tell us how every class would have a student whose laptop had died or couldn't connect to the internet or was having trouble getting logged into whatever learning solution that they were building in that. The teacher has to triage that, and now suddenly 4 to 7 minutes of that class time is gone, which is really significant when you have such a short time period. Whereas if you have paper, you just grab another book, you just grab another printout and hand it to the kid, and they're off to the races. I think a final sort of big one is just an attention thing. I had an educator tell me about how during the pandemic, not a week went by when they didn't hear an Xbox fire up in the background because somebody forgot to put themselves on mute. And another teacher who was like, these kids are so creative. Have you ever done the dinosaur game in Google Chrome?
I think I know what you mean. It comes up default on sometimes and you have to jump over things.
Yeah,
Is that the one?
Turn the internet off on your laptop.
Yes,
open a Chrome tab. That little dinosaur is actually a game. And sort of, these kids are just so creative. If they have a computer in front of them, they will find a way to not be doing the work.
That's so true.
But if they just have paper in front of them, like, maybe they're not reading, but you at least know that they're not doing something else.
Yeah, when you put it like that, there's some very clear and compelling reasons for print, and it seems very obvious why teachers would want that. Like, I can remember if I was a kid, or even when I was a kid, like, we used to use the computers just for playing games and sending silly pictures. So yeah, you'll find a way. But yeah, so print, how hard is that to scale? Like, I imagine if you've got a digital product and you just want to make a digital product, you can personalize it easy. You can send it to someone's laptop very easily. It's not difficult to replicate or personalize. But if you're printing things, I don't really understand the logistics of print too much, but I imagine that'd be quite difficult. How would
And that friction actually is a big part of what I was looking for to assess whether or not there was a good opportunity here. Because in this new age where product development cycles have gone from 18 months down to 4 weeks, it's really, really, really hard to build any defensibility around your product itself. And so you need to find some other defensive moat. And for us, like the two things that we were looking for, or really the one thing that I was looking for, is inertia. Where is there friction that we can overcome outside of the technology? And we found that publishers, there's a lot of friction with publishers as they try and think through how to work with AI, maintaining quality and their reputation. And so that offers a really interesting opportunity because IP is still really powerful in this world. And then print is another one where it's really, really hard to take AI out of the cloud and put that into a physical product and deliver it anywhere in the world. I was at Vistaprint early in my career in their sort of startup arm, and I learned about how you can use these massive international networks of print-on-demand vendors. So we can translate a book into Arabic, send it to a printer in the UAE, and have it delivered down the road. And that feels really, really exciting and kind of special.
Yeah, that's true. Because I know you can do that with t-shirts. Because I used to do that with t-shirts and be able to I used to try and buy them as the t-shirts and send them, and it was so difficult. So I just use print on demand, and then you can be selling to people and all around the world at just a click of a button. But yeah. So when you were starting out, you told me the idea and everything, how did you've done the user research? Did you have to join accelerators, that sort of thing? Or
Yeah. I think the first thing that I did was user research. The second thing was I used ChatGPT to make the first couple of books very painstakingly, rewriting them one page at a time because back then the context windows were so small, and then printing them and testing them with some teachers and seeing the response and the feedback. And so we were able to get in market. We did hire a dev shop to help support us. I put $25K in. I think we spent about $15,000 getting a product in market with our first product and getting those first sales. And we were able to do that in 10 weeks, I think, from idea to being in market. And so that was just really fun and really exciting. And then with that sort of little bit of validation, was able to raise a little friends and family capital, which, got us into those next phases. So we went through our first year pretty much with very little capital, under 100K, getting in market, a lot of sweat equity, a lot of sort of behind the curtain manual processes. But it allowed us to get out there and get some really exciting market validation for the idea. We have done a couple of accelerators since then, but we really focused on, we haven't done an accelerator that takes equity. We focused on accelerators that we thought could not only help us, we didn't focus on accelerators that were there to help us fundraise necessarily. We really focused on accelerators that would help introduce us to folks that could move the business forward in other ways.
Yeah, that's sometimes the best way. The expertise and the knowledge and the know-how, that sort of thing, can be the most valuable. So when you've got the products created, etc., how did the market react?
Yeah, I think the leveled texts or the leveled adapted novels, it tends to have a really strong positive reaction for the most part. But one of those surprises, which was really hard to hear, was there had been a lot of pushback around solutions like Newsella with their leveled articles because of implementation. Some schools have continued to only give students below grade level content, and so they never got pulled up. And that's one thing where I'm so grateful that we built in this user research capacity early on, where I was doing 5 to 10 user research interviews a week, sort of automating them, asynchronous, talk aloud protocols, and people surface these concerns. And it really helped us to understand and to find the kind of experts who could help us to explain to the teachers and schools that are using this product uh, how to do it really, how to implement it effectively, where it's going to be helpful for students. And so that was just like such an important learning curve for me, to learn to go out and find the right experts from a pedagogy and teacher theory and education perspective to help us craft the language and define, like, hey, this is not meant to just be an endless crutch. This is meant to be an accessibility point. This is meant to be what the student can take home and read alone. This is their independent reading level, but let's make sure that you're bringing them back to the grade level content in every class while you're, as the teacher, they're able to support them working through the vocabulary and sentence structure that might be too difficult for them. So really grateful for those educators that like shared that feedback and shared how, in spite of it being a really powerful accessibility tool, especially for students with neurological differences, there are ways that, as with any tool, if improperly implemented, it can actually hinder students. So how do we find that sort of balance, and how do we really explicitly share with educators the way to make this effective within their classroom?
And it seems like you've gone after quite a tough market, going after teachers. Is that your plan, just to sell the product to teachers, or will you sell to parents as well, or what do you have on the horizons?
Yeah, from day one, I've really thought that this solution, like what we're actually doing isn't building even an ed tech product. It's around this book, right? Like, books have been these static, monolithic things for hundreds of years now, right? Like, the way we really make and distribute books hasn't changed that much since the printing press was developed. Most paperback books are still made using these massive offset print runs, where they actually make a plate for every single page. There's a physical plate, just like with that old printing press. And so what we've done, which I think is exciting and powerful, and we're trying to sort of bring out into the world, is this idea that the book doesn't need to be static anymore. It can be dynamic, right? Like, at the moment, we have 90 different versions of Frankenstein that you can order. 3 different reading levels across 30 languages. We have a pending patent for embedded audio directly within the text itself. So students can scan the QR code on the back of the book. We have this passage marker system, so they can type in the numbers in the margin, and it will start reading aloud to them in that language from that point. And so I think when I think about the vision for Adaptive Reader, it's like less than 2% of books are ever translated. There are over 7,000 languages globally. And even within a single language, if you think about Chinese as this monolithic language, it's really not, right? The writing system in mainland China uses simplified Chinese versus in Taiwan uses traditional script. But a person from Beijing speaking Mandarin Chinese can't have a conversation with a person in Guangzhou speaking Cantonese, because these dialects within a given language can be really diverse. There are 16 different dialects of modern standard Arabic, for example. Maybe folks in this audience are more familiar with Spanish, right? Spain Spanish is very different than Mexican Spanish. And so when I think about what we're doing, and what's really exciting is this idea that we can actually help publishers to really expand their market. And so we have this educational bent to it too. But what we're really, and we were able to sort of train our technology and build that around public domain content for the US K-12 market. So we have a lot of novels that don't have copyright anymore. So F. Scott Fitzgerald, This Side of Paradise, The Importance of Being Earnest, The Scarlet Letter, Frankenstein. But now we're working directly with publishers that want to take their existing IP and open it up to a new world of audiences by transforming the language, being able to offer embedded audiobooks that are multilingual, and being able to print this content on demand, where the number of folks that may want a book in Lakota or Urdu might be relatively small. An offset print run where you have a storehouse full of those translated books doesn't make sense. But when you think about the 76% of people who don't speak English, and the 80+% of people for whom English is, I think it's like only 15% of the population is fluent in English. There's just a huge market out there for us to make sure that every piece of content can be accessed by any individual, irrespective of their reading skills or the language that they speak. And that feels like a really powerful thing to support publishers in.
Yeah, that's so true when you say about the languages and how things aren't. There's not that many English speakers in the world, relatively speaking. Because I remember going, when I've spent time in different countries, and the news you consume and the content you consume is just completely different. So that it's almost as if your culture or your nationality really shapes what you consume, therefore your viewpoint of the world. I can totally get that. And what are your plans with the business? What's your ambitions? Where do you want to take it?
Great question. I think we've seen a huge amount of demand from publishers for this kind of technology. And it's not just transforming the language. It's also about being able to add in dyslexia formatting, where we're bolding every other phoneme. It's about being able to choose the font and the print size for people who that can be helpful. It's even about, can you use AI to translate diagrams within a textbook? So we've had a lot of interest from the core curriculum market. Think about like a diagram of a cell in a biology textbook. Can we actually use AI to make these books really infinitely adaptable for a specific reader, while maintaining and staying really true to the content and the intent of the author and honoring that? And can we do that at scale for hundreds of publishers?
And I know we briefly touched on resilience. I'm just moving on more towards entrepreneurship now. I'll be curious, like, what do you think's made? Obviously, I can tell you're driven very much by passion and interests, but what do you think made you an entrepreneur, and why do you think you choose entrepreneurship?
Great question. I think part of it is that I make a terrible employee.
Everyone says that entrepreneurs are the worst employees.
Because I'm just like, I love problem solving, and I really love sort of working through these problems and moving really quickly and building new things. And even working in corporate innovation labs, things move a lot more slowly than the startup world. It's a very different sort of dynamic and pace. And I just love the intellectual sort of curiosity of every day having new challenges and being able to think creatively and build something new and build value. It's really fun. You don't come back to keep doing it if you don't really enjoy it, because it's a very high risk pursuit. But there's just something really magical about it too.
Definitely. And are there entrepreneurs, business people, or anyone in that sort of industry area that you look up to?
Oh gosh, so many. I think so. Like, expanding the question, one of the people I admire the most is Benjamin Franklin, actually, who I think of as like an OG, like side hustler.
Yeah.
He started newspapers and the Pony Express. He invented the lightning rod, all while also being a pioneering talent of, he redefined modern language. And there was something just really playful about him that I loved too. He started publishing letters in his brother's newspaper when I think he was like 14, under a pseudonym of a woman. And they were these very sort of spicy, interesting pieces. But I think I respect entrepreneurs across the board, including a lot of contemporary peers who come at it from a place of curiosity and a little playfulness, and are just builders. And they're, the financial outcome is one thing, but I think like if you're an entrepreneur, like truly at heart, you love getting your elbows dirty and the invention, the process of invention, and realizing that and bringing it into the world.
Yeah, I guess people used to be called inventors, but now it's a bit more, the term's morphed into entrepreneurs. But it's interesting you say that about Benjamin Franklin, because I remember reading about him and Thomas Edison. I think it was like quite recently. Obviously, in the UK, we don't learn much about them, so I'm terribly ashamed to say I know nothing about them. But I was reading about them, and I was like, so particularly Thomas Edison, I was like, so cool. Just went around inventing different things, failing, and then become really successful. Yeah,
It our CTO and I talk about this a lot, and it's like I think a lot of entrepreneurs think that this one has to be the one. This has to be their home run. And it doesn't, because you get so much better at it every time you do it. Like when I was working on Palette, which was the art one early on, I did a ton of user research interviews and I was so bad at it. And I thought I was so good at it. And that's like the most dangerous combination. And I see that with a lot of early stage entrepreneurs, but I learned so many of the things from those other experiences that have allowed us to grow Adaptive Reader really quickly. And I imagine, I have more in me after this.
yeah. But I do wonder if it's like when you think this has got to be the one, this has got to be the one. It doesn't have to be, but I think having that way of thinking makes you put everything into it, and because you've got that level of determination, it can be a real help. And so I myself like to always listening to podcasts and play on a lot of like language learning apps and that sort of thing, and started to read a lot more. Like, how do you like to learn or consume educational content?
Audiobooks, all the way.
Yes.
I love audiobooks. There are a couple that I reread every year or two. I really love Clayton Christensen. He wrote the Innovator's Dilemma. If you're familiar with that one, he was a Harvard Business School professor who had already had a very successful career as an entrepreneur. But he wrote this really wonderful book called How Will You Measure Your Life? And it's all about applying general management theories for business school, which are designed to predict outcomes from inputs to like every decision you make in your life. And so it's just like a really helpful touchstone for me rereading it to think about, where am I investing my time and my resources and my energy, both in my business and then in the things around my business that actually help make me even better prepared to do this really hard thing. Because entrepreneurship is a grind. And if you're not investing in the other areas of your life to take care of yourself and keep a healthy support network around you, that's going to impact your ability to be successful.
It's like overtraining. Like if you go to the gym too much and don't work on your recovery and your sleep, like you're going to burn out. And entrepreneurship's the same. It has its taxes. And last one, I'm curious, I like to ask this to everyone, like what do you have, like a guiding principle or a best piece of advice or a best quote you've read and something that stays with you?
That's a hard one. I think overall, the best piece of advice that I tell other entrepreneurs, we're in the Harvard Innovation Lab cohort for alumni right now. And so I meet a lot of younger entrepreneurs who are in college or just out of college. And it's like, most of those startups are going to fail, right? The vast majority of them are going to fail. People are putting so much pressure on themselves and defining success through milestones for that company. But I think when you're a startup founder, actually the most important asset that you're building is yourself. And I know it sounds like a little cheesy and cliche, but focusing on yourself is key, and also focusing on your runway. Like we talk a lot about startup runway, how much capital we have left for the business. But what I've seen kill more startups than anything else is the founder running out of personal runway. And whether that's financial or emotional. And so I really try and encourage folks to think about that aspect of it, especially if you're coming to entrepreneurship without a family financial support network. Make sure that you're taking care of yourself. And really, I think there's this thing in the entrepreneurial world where we encourage founders to pay themselves last, and to eat ramen and everything. But gosh, like if you stretch yourself too thin now, the stress, the financial stress, personally, um, and the impact that that can have on your family unit, um, can be one of the things that most sharply limits your ability to continue.
Yeah, it's almost like the spreading yourself too thin is somewhat encouraged too much. There should be more telling you to take it easy the odd Sunday or reset because it's tough.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Ethan, thank you ever so much for joining us. It's great to see what you're doing at Adaptive Reading and great to hear about you and the story. And it was absolutely a pleasure having you on. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.